Hey writer, if you're ready to level up, then buckle up. Get your pen and paper ready. It's time for another episode of the Art and Business of Writing podcast.
Hello guys, welcome back to another edition of the Art and Business of Writing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and today it's just me. Yep, little old me. But you know what? I've got a great topic that I want to engage you with today. So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about our inner critic. You know, the one who always tells us what we can't do, the one who tries to belittle us, the one who screams to us that we're not good enough. That guy, that girl. So I want to propose something to you, though. When you think about something, I want you to be very open-minded about this because I had to be open-minded when confronted with it myself. And so I'm going to ask that you do the same thing because when I was open-minded about it, it was very life-changing for me as a writer. And I believe it can be very life-changing for you as a writer because it will position your inner critic to a very familiar and comfortable place for you where it becomes more of your ally and less of your adversary. And you're probably like, what are you talking about? My inner critic as an ally? No way. Have you heard the mean things that thing has said to me? Have you heard how often it's tried to sabotage my career? Have you heard how many times it's tried to make me feel like an imposter? And yes, I have heard it all. I have been in the presence of the meanest critic within myself. We're all the hardest on ourselves, and that's just by nature who we are. But Cec Murphey is a best-selling author. He wrote Ben Carson's book, Gifted Hands, back in the 90s. He's written several books beyond that, but I want to share with you a chapter from his book called Unleash the Writer Within. It's something I feel like you need to hear the entire thing to appreciate it, and then we'll dialogue and have the conversation after the reading. So here we go. I'm going to start with it, and then we'll jump right in. The first days of pushing to become published almost became my last. I felt as if two voices screamed at me at the same time and pounded my brain with contradictory messages. One way to explain this to myself is to use the dichotomy of right brain versus left brain. The two adversaries warred against each other and neither respected the other. My right brain, filled with wonderful, exciting, creative ideas, nudged me, go for it, Cec. Great stuff. I love it. You can do it. Yes, yes. The left brain snarled and tapped on my shoulder. This is garbage. No one will ever want to read this. Why would an editor pay money for this tripe? I fought my negative voice, but the more I fought it, the louder it interfered. I published articles. The voice screamed, but I kept on. I sold my first book and 3 more after that, but additional sales didn't stop the incessant screaming inside my head. I read the experts to see what they said. I spoke with a few top-selling authors. It was gratifying to know that others fought the same battle, but their solutions left my brain shaking in confusion and amazement. My writing critic never shut up. I didn't know the answer, and I wasn't sure they did either, but I kept searching. Silence the Inner Critic is the title of a chapter of a book I picked up recently. The writing instructor advised students to yell, shh, or shut up, when that disquieting voice interfered with the writing flow. He also offered them several techniques they could use to silence that voice. He insisted that if they denied the existence of the critical scream, they didn't have to listen. Shut up the voice? Deny the existence? The more I thought about such advice, the more I disagreed. What if that inner editor isn't totally bad? What if that inner critic wants to be my friend and not my enemy? What if the critic has something valuable to say? What if that voice is correct? Largely correct. Only a quarter correct. It is possible that I need to listen to the carping and yelling instead of fighting and arguing. Others suggest you gently ignore your inner critic. Don't argue, but continue on as if there is no sound. That's only slightly different from the other advice. Think about what such advice really means. Ignoring or pushing aside parts of yourself that you don't like. Ignoring these parts doesn't work, or at least it's not a productive procedure. When I've tried that technique, the voice becomes even more insistent. It's like the person who stands with a finger on my doorbell and won't stop ringing until I open the door. Those inner critics are clever, and they'll find a way to make you hear their voices. They won't be ignored, or at least not forever. That approach to inner critic makes me think of individuals who jump on the latest fad diet. They soon learn everything they can't eat and then push aside those foods. Depravity works at first, but finally the body rebels and says, I'm going to eat. In fact, I'll show you. I'll demand even more food this time. Ignoring isn't the answer, and as I learned, it refuses to silence itself. Some experts say you need to separate the creator and the internal censor. Give yourself space to explore, think, feel, and express. They say you do that by tuning in to other channels in your brain. But is that good advice? Isn't ignoring it, denying it, or being ashamed of such a voice? Other experts will urge you to find ways to appease the censor. I used to have a book in my library with a chapter called Making Peace with Your Inner Critic. The author said that instead of pushing away the demanding voices, you need to release them, to let them go. He spent a dozen pages to point out that inner critics are unsatisfied parts of yourself and that as you accept yourself, you can release those voices. Although that advice didn't seem right, at least he wasn't a step beyond silencing the noise. Another instructor urges writers to pause and write exactly the words that their inner critic speaks. If that helps, then do it. That seems quirky to me, and I think it distracts, leads you off the path, and may hinder your creativity. Here's where I stand today. I don't believe in ignoring the internal editor. I do believe there's a time to listen to it. If you're open to every part of yourself, and I hope you will be, you can teach your right brain and left brain to hug each other and work in harmony. Here's how I figured this out. In 1989, a publisher contacted me to ghostwrite the autobiography of Ben Carson of Johns Hopkins Hospital. I enjoyed working with Ben in a motel room in Baltimore and getting the data from him. It was unquestionably the fastest, smoothest interview I'd ever done. Afterward, I flew home to Atlanta and began to write. For the first 6 chapters, my right brain cheered me on. This is wonderful. You're getting it. Yes, good stuff. In the middle of chapter 7, something shifted inside my head. The inner critic who had remained silent, but then he whispered, this isn't really bad. I mean, it doesn't stink, but that's not good. I mentally screamed, get thee behind me, Satan, and kept on writing. After that experience, the writing didn't flow as rapidly, and the critic's voice said, it's getting worse. You're only going downhill. For the next 5 or 6 chapters, the critical voice grew more insistent. My typing slowed, my critical powers numbed, and I kept on going though. They'll demand you return the advance, the voice threatened. They'll never ask you to do another book. The battle raged, but I kept on. I was stubborn, and I reminded myself that I had a contract and an ethical obligation to complete the book, no matter how badly it turned out. The next day, when I finished the full draft, I sighed, shut off my computer for a day, and groaned about the miserable writing I'd done. For 2 days, I kept trying to figure out what I could do to salvage the mess I'd made of the wonderful story of Dr. Ben Carson. Finally, I decided that the only thing I could do was to sit in front of my computer and start to repair the job, if it wasn't already beyond that. After I turned on my computer, I began to read my material as I started the revision. Now that I had a full manuscript, I gave my inner critic total freedom to change anything. It's okay, I told myself. Be as critical, mean, and as hard as you want. Let's make this a good book. My inner censor went to work. It caught bad sentence or a place where I'd use the same word 4 times in a single paragraph. I rewrote an occasional sentence. To my surprise, I couldn't find the places my inner critic had screamed about so loudly. I found weak spots, many of them, and places I needed to clarify for a few paragraphs where I had gotten too technical or too verbose in a particular section. By the time I had finished the revision, I said, this wasn't as bad as I thought. It's not perfect and I need to do more work on it, but it's not completely garbage. The next day, when I finished Ben Carson's autobiography called Gifted Hands and sent the full manuscript to my editor, it has been published by HarperCollins, Zondervan, and Review and Herald. Since 1990, the book has sold in excess of 4 million copies in English and about 40 other languages. It's still available in hardback, trade paper, and mass paper. In 2010, Johnson & Johnson presented the film version on TNT starring Cuba Gooding Jr., and it followed the book quite closely. Next to 90 Minutes in Heaven, is the best-selling book I've ever written. What did I learn from that experience? First, I couldn't trust my emotions on the good or inferior level of my writing while I was in the process. Second, I decided I needed to listen to every part of myself. Listen to that voice speak. The critic sounded like a tyrant, but perhaps it was tired of being pushed around. Once I allowed both sides of my brain to function, I felt more at peace and open. I now listen to my inner wisdom. Why consider the inner editor an enemy or a nuisance? Why not engage that part as a helper? Why fight part of myself that wants to help? It took a long time before I could consider that voice a friend. But that came in time. Now I trust and honor the left part of my brain as much as I do the right side. My inner critic can be my friend, so I honor and trust that voice. So that's the chapter, guys. And I'd love to hear what you think about that, because after reading that, it helped me to really get some perspective, because I know that as a writer, I can be very hard on myself about things that I didn't complete or didn't accomplish, whether that could be even just over the last couple of weeks being in such a place where I couldn't complete my podcast episodes, or it could be that I've got deadlines and I'm crunching over a story, which is what I went through 2 weeks ago, where I was really struggling through a story and I wasn't even sure I liked the story at all, and my critic was going in on me. And finally, as always, as you probably know yourself, once you submit the story, typically your editor will just love it. And that's kind of what happened for me. So I just want to encourage you, like what Cec Murphey did, just push through the writing, get the writing done, and then let the editor have its say. So what I like, I think he talks about later chapters, what he starts to do now is that he will tell his critic before he writes, you know what, if you can just sit aside right now and say nothing to me, let me get this story hammered out and let me get this piece written and done, then it's all yours. You can have it, you can go through it, you can do whatever you want to it. And he said that's how he's developed harmony, because he knows that creative side is now going to get a chance to be free to write as much as it wants to get everything down on paper. And the other side, which is more critical, is going to get its chance to also be the editor and be able to polish everything. And so he says now both sides live in harmony because they both know they have a role in the final work. And so I want to leave you with that, just thinking about your inner critic as a friend, thinking about your inner critic as your editor, thinking about your inner critic as a beta reader even, thinking about that inner critic as something reliable, as an emotional part of you that's very reliable, because yes, our emotional parts do betray us, like he says. You know, they get us believing the lies of the lies, getting us to believe the words of the inner critic. Sometimes they are lies. Sometimes our inner critics just mean to us, and we interpret them as being very mean to us. But when it's about the work, yeah, we tend to believe that, oh yeah, we're not good writers. We're not good authors. But in reality, we are. We're capable. We're worthy. We're here. And so make that contract with your inner editor, and even ask it questions. And when it asks you things, if you're writing something, or if you're an aspiring writer and you haven't gotten anything done or completed, and your inner editor is saying, hey man, you're never going to publish this, you're never going to get that done, ask it why it thinks that. And then maybe that's because you've been talking about it for the last 3 or 4 years and you haven't done anything about it. You haven't published a single word, and you've been talking about publishing a book, and you've been working on a book for 4 years. Or maybe it's you saying that you want to be a writer and you want to write for magazines or newspapers or websites, and you haven't submitted a single article, or you haven't even published anything on your blog or on Medium or any of these free places where you can actually publish things to get people to look at it. So ask your inner critic, ask it questions, find out why it's saying those things, as opposed to it's being mean, I just want the good vibes, I want it to go away. Ask it what it's really thinking. And that's what I want to leave you with today. And next week we'll be back with some more interviews, but this is a Good Friday thought, and I hope that you can appreciate it. Hope you can just take it into the weekend, meditate on it, chew on it for a bit, and become friends with your inner critic. I'd love to hear more from you. Hop on the blog, chrisjonesinc.com. Leave some comments on this post. I just want to hear what you think about what Cec Murphey has to say about just shifting that relationship with the editor. I think it's a fantastic way to really jumpstart and get our creativity moving in a direction that's going to benefit us, as opposed to having those two halves battling each other. Until next time, guys.
How's that for inspiring? I hope you take action on one thing you learned in today's episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and left a review on iTunes, I want to encourage you to do that too. Finally, be sure to visit chrisjonesinc.com to sign up for updates. Don't worry, I won't spam you. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.